Um, so we've been discussing second generation cell phone systems, and I want to continue that discussion. So we were talking about GSM systems, which are used uh, were used in the United States along with CDMA systems. GSM is popular throughout the rest of the world, and then relied on the use of SIM cards. Let's talk a little bit about handoffs. There are several different type of handoffs that can occur within GSM. Remember, with GSM, we had not only different frequency channels, but also within a frequency channel, we had time division multiplexing, 8 different slots within a single frequency channel. So you could have different types of handoffs. You could even have a handoff occur within a cell where the user is handed off to a new frequency channel or a new time slot at the same frequency channel. And this can happen due to interference would be one reason. Another type of handoff that you could have is just between two cells that are in the same cluster. So this handoff would be, typically happen for a mobile user as they're moving between cells that are served by the same base station controller. Or you could have, if the user is moving between two cells that have different base station controllers, different clusters. That's another type of handoff that requires coordination with the mobile switching center. And then lastly, you could have a handoff where a user is actually moving between cells that are managed by two different mobile switching centers. So this kind of illustrates what happens when a user is switching between two base station controllers, and two clusters that are handled serviced by the same mobile switching center. So again, this handoff is generally determined when the power level detected at the user from the base station, when that gets too weak, then the handover request can be made. And if that's, again, to another base station controller handled by the mobile switching center, that can be managed by the mobile switching center. And that process is illustrated here, how the mobile switching center actually coordinates the handover request from base station 1 to base station 2. And then the blue box here is the point at which the handoff occurs, and then there's communication between the mobile system and the new base station controller. And if you're switching between two mobile switching centers, then there's a lot more steps that have to take uh, place. Actually, this is between two base station controllers handled by the same mobile switching center, um, but a lot more steps involved in that particular handoff procedure. And then finally, if it's between mobile switching centers, how the home mobile switching center has to actually be involved. And so communication has to take place over the traditional backbone network, so that the relocation information can be passed back and forth between the home mobile switching center. Okay. Then another new feature added in second generation phone systems was actually the short messaging service, or SMS, or texting, and that was introduced with the GSM service providers. It actually used the control channels instead of any of the real-time traffic channels that were used for voice, for example. One huge difference for SMS is that SMS messages could actually be stored. So it was a store and forwarding service, as opposed to, where, we used our phones for conversations. Both users had to be actively involved. With the SMS, you could send a text, and the receiver didn't have to have their phone on or even be connected to a local base station, or they could be out of range of any base station. The SMS messages ideally would be stored and then delivered when the receiving mobile station was actually turned on, or then connected to a base station. So this was an asynchronous form of communication. At least that's how it was intended. I think most of us now tend to get a little upset if we don't get an immediate response to our text. And so it's almost evolved into a synchronous form of non-voice communication. It was originally limited to 160 characters, and I think there are a couple different stories as to why that original limit was placed. I think that the most believable story is that was due to the packet length limitations, that only 160 characters could be fit into a single control channel packet, and so that was the limitation. Another story is that one of the developers looked at a number of different communication mechanisms like postcards, short notes that he'd written, and found that most of them fell under a 160 character limit, and so he placed that limit on SMS messages. Standards developed so that we could send longer text messages using concatenation. Eventually, SMS evolved into what's now known as MMS, which is provided by third generation and above systems that allow us to transmit not only text, but also audio, pictures, and even short video. Okay. The other competing second generation technology is known as IS-95 or CDMA1. Again, this was used by Sprint, Verizon, and US Cellular in the United States. The technology was actually was developed by a company named Qualcomm. So if you remember with CDMA, the basic concept is that it's a spread spectrum technique. And then so the basic concept is that the user bit stream is multiplied by much higher frequency, essentially not really a pseudo-random code, but an orthogonal code, um, using very small, very short pulses, so wide bandwidth. And then by using a number of different orthogonal codes, we can transmit all these different messages simultaneously using the same available frequencies. So we'll talk a little bit about IS-95 or CDMA or CDMA1. We'll see that as we evolved into third generation systems, even GSM evolved into a CDMA. But again, we still have kind of these two different phone manufacturers, even for 3G, where a standard developed because phones for one manufacturer still had to support GSM, the second generation, because that infrastructure was in place over large sections of the country. And then the other set of phones actually had to support second generation CDMA for similar reasons. So the existing cellular frequency bands were used to were split into 10 different frequency bands that were used by CDMA. So each of the frequency bands was 1.25 megahertz. Each of these bands um, um, could support 64 simultaneous users. or 64 different CDMA codes. So that we had a total of 640 different channels essentially. Now, these channels were reused in every cell, so there's not the concept actually of a cluster with CDMA, or equivalently, a cluster is made up of a single cell. So these 10 frequency bands are reused in every adjacent cell with CDMA, as opposed to being divided up in a cluster like they are with GSM. The channel rate is actually 1.2 megabits per second. Again, this is not actually data bits, but the much shorter chips that are used with the spread spectrum code. So 64-bit Walsh codes are used, and so they provided 64 channels within each of the 10 frequency bands, or essentially 640 different channels. And so the 64-bit Walsh codes are well known. So if that's all that was used, the radio signals could actually be decoded. We could any one of the 64, or using all 64, you could recover the data. There's actually more security involved in that. In addition to the 64-bit Walsh codes, which provide the spreading of the spectrum. In addition to those, there were long pseudo noise codes and short pseudo noise codes that were also mixed with the data. And these were developed also using information on the phone, so that there's security involved. And so knowing the Walsh code is not enough. You actually have to also know the pseudo noise code that's associated with a particular phone in order to descramble the data. Okay. So here are some of the logical channels that are provided in CDMA1. For the forward channel from the base station to the mobile station, you have a pilot channel. So that's used by the mobile systems as they move into the different cell areas to actually synchronize and lock onto channels provided by the base station. And the paging channels are used to let the mobile systems know that they're receiving a call. Then there are synchronization channels, and then as well as traffic channels as well. And the traffic channels could actually support variable bit rates, so different types of voice quality, and then also provided for power control and signaling messages. And then the reverse channels, you had what were known as access channels, for a mobile system to request access to the system or request a particular channel. And then the traffic channels are similar to those for the base station. The forward and reverse links, so you had 10 frequency channels in each direction. They were separated by 45 megahertz. Again, as shown on the previous slide, the forward channel was split up into several logical channels. Again, this is on each of the 10 frequency bands. You had a pilot channel, paging channel, sync channel, and then traffic channels. So the pilot channel used one of the 64 codes. Paging channels used 7. The sync channel used an additional code. The remainder were used for traffic channels. And then, so all the different channels kind of used a similar technique. This slide actually shows how the pilot channel and sync channel were actually developed. So the pilot channel was mixed with the particular Walsh code, again at essentially mixing with all zeros would transmit just the Walsh code for the pilot channel. And then that was actually mixed with both cosine and then sine carriers to transmit both streams, the I and Q streams for this particular pilot signal. And then the sync channel was also used convolutional encoding When we've talked about that for error control, it was essentially a 1200 bit per second channel that the mobile stations would use for synchronization to the base station. And again, the same mixing with with cosine and sine to produce the end phase and quadrature channels. Paging channel, similarly, the pseudo noise code was actually mixed in to provide some security. But again, if you'll notice, all of the ultimate chip rate is 1.2 megabits per second, or megacycles per second here. So the basic channel protocol can be summarized by: the mobile system acquires phase, timing, and signal strength information from the pilot channel, and then synchronizes via the sync channel. It gets system parameters via the paging channel, and then they communicate with one another using the access and paging channels during system acquisition and paging, and then the traffic channels when for an actual conversation. Okay. So just some details. The pilot channel is transmitted at all times, uses Walsh code W0, provides phase and timing information to the mobile systems, and also signal strength information. So the signal strength is used to determine when the mobile system should switch from one channel to another, or from one cell, from one base station to another. As it moves away from one base station, gets closer to another, the signal strength will change. It's reused in every cell and sector with a different short pseudo noise code in order to identify the cell and sector. And then the sync channel is used by the mobile system after it's locked onto the pilot system. It operates at 1200 bits per second, uses a particular Walsh code, and then the mobile system uses that then to synchronize its clocks with that of the rest of the systems communicating with that particular base station. The paging channel is used to page mobile systems, or let them know that a phone call is intended for them. So again, this paging channel is shared by all the different mobile systems connected using that cell. Again, it's only used during call setup, so it can be shared, and a system can have as many as 7 different paging channels to communicate with the 640 different mobile systems that would be within a cell. Again, a long pseudo-random noise code is used with the paging channel. And then here's some additional details on the paging channel. The forward traffic channels are used to carry user data and signaling data. Some features had different variable bit rates. So bit rate up to what was known a bit rate up to 9600 bits per second, what was known as rate set 1, and then a higher bit rate up to 14.4 kilobits per second, rate set 2. They all used a frame length of 20 milliseconds, but the number of bits then within that frame actually would vary depending on whether it's a rate set 1 or rate set 2. And I'll show some additional details of that. Again, these use the remaining Walsh codes, which weren't taken up by the pilot and access channels, and then also the paging channels. And so this shows, actually this goes back to access channel generation. This is showing forward traffic generation and how it can support traffic at different bit per second rates, all supporting what's known as rate set 1. Can similar to others, there is error correction built in here with this convolutional encoding and block interleaving. And then for security, the data is actually mixed with a pseudo noise generator that depends on the user, a number associated with that particular mobile system. And then the orthogonal modulation is where the data is further mixed with the Walsh code that uses the very short bits to produce the very short pulses then that results in the spread spectrum. And then similarly, the only difference here with rate set 2 is it actually supported higher had a higher bit per second limit in rate set 2. Here's some details on the different frames for rate set 1 and rate set 2. Notice that they all are 20 milliseconds. They just varied in the number of bits that would fit within the frame depending on the actual bit rate. And similarly for rate set 2, use the same rate duration, but change the number of bits within a frame. Okay. And kind of just to summarize, the forward channels are spread using one of the 64 orthogonal Walsh codes. So again, all 64 users, are using the same frequency simultaneously, but at the base station they mix the signal again with one of the 64 Walsh codes to produce 64 different data streams at the base station corresponding to each one of the mobile system users. For additional security, pseudo noise sequences were used so that someone couldn't actually just snoop on the radio signal and mix it with the Walsh signal. They would recover this random data stream and not be able to recover the data further without knowing the pseudo noise sequence. And then the reverse channels are also spread using the long pseudo noise sequence, and then the 64 orthogonal Walsh. Actually, spread's probably a bad choice of words there. They're randomized for security purposes. The orthogonal Walsh codes actually provide the spreading, and then that's further scrambled by a short pseudo noise sequence to identify a particular cell or sector within a cell. Okay. And then summary on the access channel. It's a random access channel used by the mobile systems to send information to the base station. So one or more access channels are paired with a paging channel. Mobile systems respond to paging channels on their corresponding access channels. So on the access channel, it was a 48 bit per second, and then used the long pseudo noise sequence that was made up of a number of different identifiers to make it unique. Mobile systems actually compete for access. If so, a mobile system would have to send a message on an access channel when it wants to make a call. So it would choose an access channel at random from the set associated with the paging channel. If there's a collision, their transmissions will interfere with each other, and there is no channel system sensing for collision avoidance. If the mobile system doesn't get an acknowledgement back, it makes another attempt after a random wait. So similar to some of the contention methods we looked at in a previous chapter. The reverse traffic channel is used to carry user data and signaling data. Again, a base station will support up to 61 reverse traffic channels. Again, the other channels are reserved for the pilot and paging channels. Supports different data transfer rates. Signaling information is actually multiplexed with user data. So in the signaling information, there would be information like a call hang-up information, for example. A long pseudo noise mask is used to uniquely identify a mobile system. And orthogonal modulation consists of sending one of the 64 possible Walsh codes for each of the different data streams. And so this shows the reverse traffic generation. Again, all the blocks are pretty similar, with error correction, mixing with the pseudo noise generator, and then mixing again with the Walsh code to provide the spread spectrum, and then simultaneous mixing with cosine and sine for the same, to actually provide some redundancy here for the same bit streams. And then this is the corresponding figure for the second rate set. One of the other issues with CDMA, and this is a little more important with CDMA than it is GSM, is power control. If a mobile system is too far away from the base station, the error rate is too high. If it's too close, it will interfere with other users that are farther away. So again, there's a power control channel so that the mobile system could actually increase or decrease its transmitted power level in 1 dB steps. There have been different types of control that have been developed. Closed loop power control is power control information is sent from the mobile station to the base station. It will sense if it's getting too far away, and then receive back a message indicating that it should increase or decrease its power. With open loop power control, the mobile station senses the strength of the pilot signal and then automatically adjusts its power without feedback from the base station. And then you can also have open loop power control at the base station, where the base station can also decrease its or increase its power level gradually and wait to hear from the mobile station what the frame error rate is. Okay, I think that's it for CDMA 1. And I think this is the second video for today's lecture. We'll actually look at third generation systems next time. Again, there won't be, I won't put up any lecture on Friday because of the Easter holiday. There is a homework assignment to go along with today's lecture. Again, the lectures are kind of long-winded. All of this information is available in the textbook, so you should be able to answer, I think, the homework questions by skimming through the material in the textbook. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday.